In this episode of One to One, I catch up with Rob Assimakopoulos, multi-sector CMO and principal Silver Scion Inc. We discuss why CX is the ultimate marketing tool and how business leaders can consolidate the two functions. Really excited to have Rob on this podcast, CMO of a variety of awesome companies in Canada across GM, Canadian Football League, and most recently CIBC. You know, you've worked with some of these top brands, and your impressive portfolio speaks volumes about your wealth of experience in marketing and branding. Tell us more about your career trajectory and what led to this field.
Thanks, Scott. My career trajectory was a circuitous one in many ways. I started off as a financial analyst, but sort of followed my interest in marketing, where I'd say I had one of my best experiences professionally at Procter & Gamble, both in Canada and the United States and the rest of the world. From there, I went on to the beer business, but shortly after that, I left sort of consumer packaged goods to pursue areas that, I was a bit more interested in, particularly when it came to services and experiences and things like that. Notwithstanding the fact that automotive is a product, a lot of how you experience an automobile is through the experiences around it, whether it be how you experience the vehicle, how you experience the service, the purchase, and everything else. Ultimately to a pure service role at the bank. And, joining a large Canadian bank was one of the most rewarding experiences I'd had, and certainly was a place where I really got to feel what it was like to try to tackle the challenge of building a great customer experience at scale.
And you worked for the Canadian Football League, which I'm a huge football fan. Thought that was one of the coolest roles you've had within your resume. Not probably as impressive for others, but I think it's a pretty cool role helping build out that brand over the last number of years. Yeah,
it was very cool because, a lot of the experiences, certainly if you just allow the on-field product to, handle the experience, you miss out on so many opportunities to strengthen relationships with your fans. And so for us there, the advent of digital media was exploding at the time I was at the CFL. And so we took a lot of opportunities to build great fan relationships using all different media channels, different editorial strategies, social media, but also experiencing the product through our licensed merchandise. So there are a lot of great ways to make people feel really great about being part of your brand. And one of the things that sports taught me that I don't think I would have learned anywhere else is how you can elicit a great feeling among your customers or your fans, as the case may be, through a variety of different and creative means.
That's cool. And that's a great segue. In your own words, what is customer experience?
In my own words, it's basically how people feel when they buy something from someone. And I chose those words carefully because it's how you feel. I suppose, I first learned about customer experience through my parents' restaurant, a very small place in rural Ontario, which, the food was good, if not unspectacular, but what made them, what gave them a good, consistent business was very simple proprietors making simple food for a simple community. They helped people feel really good about themselves and about, how they felt about being part of the family that my parents created through their restaurant. It really was about a feeling. A customer experience is supposed to elicit an emotion among your clients and customers. And, there are a lot of different ways to measure that. Things like J.D. Power measures very practically how a product performs or how well a service is delivered. But then you've got all these other means like, NPS surveys and things like that, which are trying to get at how people feel. And, the emotional response is an elusive one. It's a very difficult one to measure. It's as difficult, if not more so, to actually elicit in people. So anyone who talks customer experience can't get too wrapped up in the task. They have to start to get a sense for what impressions they leave on people. So for me, it's how you make people feel about you and your product when they're buying it.
It's interesting when you look at your last three roles of GM, the CFL, and CIBC, three very distinct paths to that customer engagement and driving that customer experience. That's a great summary of what your definition of CX is. And so when you couple that with marketing, what's your take on marketing's role in aligning the brand, the customer experience, as well as the employee experience?
Well, marketing should be obsessed with and capturing the consumer's mindset and the emotional state. Understand really what makes them tick. What are their biases, their preferences, their desires? Now, marketing, depending on the organization, can often spend a lot of that time mapping emotions when it comes to a very specific task, like communicating to people and putting an ad or a communication together, or in building a product or a value proposition. But in what is a burgeoning service economy and a higher expectation that you not only transact the product, but people need to experience it really well, marketing has to take that knowledge and apply it to helping craft and design experiences. It can be in a product or service, right? It didn't used to be as important to design how a product was experienced through its packaging, for example. How does a package feel when you carry it, when you open it, when you pull it off a shelf, or when you receive it at home? That's part of the experience. Marketing is supposed to help service design, how and when to engage people, the tone you use, but helping them communicate to people, understanding what people's channel preferences are, and helping design engagements in those channels. And not just crafting the messaging, but crafting how it's delivered to people in those channels. So marketing's got to take its understanding of the consumer and assert it to other aspects of the organization that ultimately reach the consumer or the client, and help them do that as well.
That's a great answer. And in terms of marketing being focused solely on the customer journey, or the front line being focused on a specific portion of that customer interaction, how do you bring that all together? So marketing effort is solely concentrated on the customer journey, resulting in a fragmented approach, sometimes inconsistent execution and reduced impact. How can organizations break down that traditional silo mentality, create alignment between the front line, between marketing, care, et cetera, to ensure that business objectives, strategy, tech, CX, and branding is all aligned?
Well, first of all, I think if you don't own critical parts of the journey, it's very difficult to come in from the outside to a product owner or a channel owner and influence them. It can be difficult. You run into territorialism, or you run into a negotiation of what's the right way to do things. And so I believe customer experience should be a central mandate of any product or channel owner. In fact, in some cases, if you look at some organizations, they don't actually measure their channel owners on hard financials. Some of them actually measure them on client or customer experience. Marketing should be recruited in to be part of that solution to help craft the perfect journey and channel or product strategy, but otherwise asserting themselves from outside of it, so people who own critical parts of the journey, can be very difficult and transactional. So I think organizations have to ask themselves, what burden are you placing on many of your different business owners? And are you taking essential things they should be measured with, and making it someone else's problem? Because the people who don't own the product or don't own the channel are measured against client experience, you're asking for a lot of transactional inefficiency in the organization.
How was that applied when you were at the CFL? So obviously that's a very high touch, fan-based organization. How did you adhere to this to drive that CX across the different functions of the organization?
Great question. So in a sports league, the league office sort of runs a lot of championship games and playoff games and things like that. But the daily fan experience, let's say the driveway to driveway experience, is kind of owned by the teams. So each team is charged with building a fan experience unique to them, but also in keeping with the overall league's essence, if you will. So, marketing can support and help, but at the end of the day, if a team wants to do things a certain way, let's say a team wants to have a family zone because they really believe it's a great way for parents and children to experience a game, maybe outside the confines of maybe a more boisterous fan base. Teams can do that. Marketing can suggest it. Teams are ultimately, it's up to their discretion to do it. So there's a great example of where if the marketing organization and the teams aren't working in close collaboration, you have marketing asserting a point of view and the team saying, well, I'm going to do things my way, or I don't see the value of that, or it's expensive or whatever. So leagues, and particularly marketing organizations and leagues, have to be very convincing, and you have to get, a sort of a collective view of what success looks like, and that can be challenging. When it comes to their league remit, marketers can do a lot. They can engage fans using the digital and multimedia tools that they have. So using things like editorials, using things like video, highlight reels, that kind of thing, direct to consumer, through social, those kinds of ways can be a great way to build a great experience. But experiences transcend the live game. They can also be when the game's not happening. What's my experience then? What's my experience buying an article of licensed merchandise? Did it get there quickly? Was it in good was it in good repair and all that other stuff? So it's a very complex environment where you can double down on, where you own it, you can really double down on it. So as a league office marketer, you can really do a lot. And subject to whether or not you have great relationships with the teams, you can also do a lot with the teams. But again, it's they really own that in stadium experience.
The CFL has done a really good job in very specific markets to really drive that fan engagement. Which could segue to the next question. In your opinion, what are some strategies a company can implement to become a customer-centric org and do what's best for the customers as the way to drive business growth?
Well, I think the first thing you do is you have to measure. You have to get a good, reliable, accurate metric of your customer experience, of how people feel about you, and hold people accountable to them who can influence that metric. I've seen some organizations where customer experience is a silo unto itself, and it's always knocking on people's doors, trying to influence them to improve the experience. So those who are actually delivering the experience should be held accountable to the metrics. I think measuring sales is not enough. I think I mentioned earlier, some organizations like Apple in their stores incentivize their stores by customer experience, not by financials. It doesn't mean they don't measure the financials. It means that they incentivize customer experience because they're sophisticated enough to know that customer experience is the gateway to more sales. I think hard financial metrics should be held more centrally. While at the outermost customer-facing nodes of an organization or an experience or whatever, the delivery, those who are responsible for the delivery experience have to be the primary owners of customer experience. So if that's one thing organizations can do to improve that, it is to make those who deliver it accountable for that metric.
That's interesting. And I think it's, CX is critical for any business, whether it's auto, whether it's telco, whether it's banking, or even, the CFL. Use an example of in the auto industry, there's a very low probability that customer is going to come back to the same dealership. Or, my experience in telco, the more you're engaging with the customer, and if you have a really awesome experience right out of the gates, the higher likelihood they're going to come back and buy that residential service, that TV, that connected home solution. What's the one thing in your career that you're most proud of driving that CX and that increase in, that one metric of how do you drive more from your customers?
I suppose there are a few. I'd say one of the things I was most proud of is actually building an onboarding program at the bank when I was there. Onboarding a new relationship, particularly when the products are complicated, complex, expensive, it can be the most delicate part of the relationship. It's funny, when I was when I worked in restaurants growing up, we had this sort of edict which said, don't piss them off on the way in the door, don't piss them off on the way out the door.
That's awesome.
Those are critical moments in your customer experience. So we found in banking, onboarding can often be the most delicate part of the relationship. It's the difference between a happy, lucrative customer relationship for a lifetime or kind of a temporary in and out thing. We made some great strides improving the experience for customers in automotive by enhancing the service experience and the sales experience. And one of the things was transparency. Whether it's automotive or even banking, they can be complex and technical. And the people on the selling side can sometimes be ill-equipped to explain things, and you can't blame them because they have a lot to think about. And there's a lot of technical stuff to know. At the same time, customers can tend to be intimidated by technicalities, fee structures, aspects of the service and product. So you have to help people become gradually accustomed to products and services that you're offering them. You got to speak to them in plain language. You have to unfold aspects of the product and service over time using multiple forms of media, multiple channels. And when you do that, you accomplish the following three things. The first thing you accomplish is trust. Okay. Um, Banks can often erode trust with confusing language and tactics. And transparency is the single biggest way to earn people's trust. Automotive is the same way. They're complex devices that you're buying, and often they're underpinned by complex, financial structures, leasing or financial agreements. So transparency leads directly to trust. The second thing you'll accomplish is profitability. When you have a relationship with a fee structure and people are surprised by the fees, they immediately reject them and they demand refunds and they tie up your phones. Not only is that a costly customer, but it's a customer that in the future isn't a profitable one. So when people really understand the relationship, they don't have a problem paying fees in any context when they understand it. They have a problem paying fees that they didn't think they were supposed to be paying. So you won't be rebating fees. You won't be tying up your calls, your call centers, if people understand. So that leads to a more profitable relationship. And then the third is, long-term profitability through retention. People will stay and people will buy more when they're happy. And that's just a scientifically proven fact. It's becoming easier and easier to untangle relationships, whether it's banking relationship, an automotive relationship, a subscription. So it's more than important than ever to keep customers so that you spend so much money and time acquiring. It's important you keep them. One of the things that's happening in a frictionless, technology-based world, it's becoming frictionless to start and end relationships as well. Relationships can be the glue to a long-term profitable franchise if the experience is great. And so people really have to work on making people feel good about being with you. And so those are some of the strategies you can employ to build a good experience that pays off later.
And I think that goes across. I know you're implying more towards the banking industry or financial services. This applies across a lot of verticals. And I think, my personal experience from banking, going through mortgages like everybody is, they're trying to refinance because the rates are so great. Very little interaction from my current bank, even though there's very clear signs of me probably churning out that mortgage over the next couple months. And it's, with that ongoing dialogue and interaction, chances are I probably would have stayed with the bank I'm with. And I think that's primary kind of objective one on retention. Then on trust side and profitability, it was interesting you talked about the fees and the anger that people have around these unknown fees that just pop up. I love your story that you told me before around, simplifying that complex of this really crazy complex bank plan and really going back to what is the customer looking for and really zeroing in on that. Doesn't matter how it works in the background. I think that applies to a company like Statflo, a telco, a bank, etc., that it doesn't really matter how it works in the background. It's more around what value is it delivering for the customer, and can you easily explain that to the customer on their terms and in their language?
Yeah, I tell you, technical speak is one of those hidden pitfalls in a customer relationship. And it happens on both sides of the desk. The seller at times may not be well prepared to explain some of the technical concepts to the customer for whatever reason. They either haven't trained up on it or they're brand new to the job. And the customer thinks you're kind of supposed to know this. Customer doesn't want to look stupid. So they'll hear 5 or 6 acronyms or things they don't understand, and then they'll walk away. And so what they don't realize sometimes is they just agreed to something. The person selling it thinks, well, we're good. I think, they nodded. So building a great customer experience is also actually, you kind of have to, peel a layer into the customer relationship to actually scrutinize your own self, your own service and products. Do they really understand that? Are we really this good at explaining things? Because you might often be surprised.
My wife's in finance and she explains her financial models and goes in one ear and out the other on a very regular basis.
Yeah.
So Just kind of switching gears a little bit, you think of that customer experience and simplifying the complex. In today's hyper-connected world, there's a lot of outdated customer experiences that are losing out to innovative initiatives that combine that awesome technology with that focus on humanizing those interactions. What CX strategies can retail banks specifically implement to differentiate their services and drive greater customer satisfaction and loyalty?
I would say that these are universal. Certainly, they would be great for retail banks, but what I would share is it's universally applicable, I think, beyond banks. And the first is use customer preferred channels to communicate to people. People feel really good if they're, today especially, communicating in ways they want to. If they want an email, send them an email. If they want to talk on the phone, then light up a phone. But in banking especially, mobile is growing very quickly. You can do a lot of banking on your mobile phone and is fast becoming the customer's preferred channel for transacting in banking. So that's where the service experience needs to migrate quickly, particularly when it comes to retail banking, or in fact any other industry where there's a lot at stake, a high involvement industry, because the mobile channel is very responsive. It's responsive and it's intimate. And when something is really important to people, they want communication to land on their phone quickly. And so that's really important. So I think they really have to start migrating service levels or service functions to mobile.
Sorry, I was just going to pop into that. I think what's interesting is we were talking about this the other day. You see a phone call coming in, you don't recognize the number. Chances are you're going to ignore it. It's going to go straight to voicemail. I think you tie into the mobile piece of, when we're talking to customers or prospects, the need for customers to want and a desire that it's like 90+% of customers want that two-way interaction via text. And you think of the read rate and some of the stats that a lot of the large organizations look at around, response rate and customer engagement rate. When you send something via text, it is that local personal interaction, but it's also a high read rate of 98+%. So it is a much stronger way to interact with those customers out of the gates, and then potentially follow up with that phone call once a customer recognizes the number.
Yeah, I mean, mobile, communicating on text is more than double the contact rate of emails. Best in class email open rates are just 40% or just north of that. So on text, it's more than double that. So yeah, you can't give them an experience unless you reach them, and the best way to reach them today is SMS and mobile. The other thing I would say about a good solid CX strategy is dress rehearse everything before it makes its way to the customer. Any new product, any new service, even old ones actually, which have been, poorly designed, go and pick apart every possible delight or detractor, and don't serve the food until the menu's perfect. So dress rehearsals are really critical for building good customer experiences. And I'd say another one is organize better. There is a lot of CX, I don't know what you call it, CX washing in organizations where you appoint somebody, they don't really own anything. They don't own either the delivery mechanism for customer experience, or maybe they own the people who are actually explaining to the customers the experience by owning a call center, but do they actually own the experience itself? So organizations have to organize, I think in some cases better, so that those who are building it have to own the experience. It can't be somebody else's problem. So if you use a preferred channel, if you test and dress rehearse things really well before they go to the customer, and you make the people who are designing and delivering it accountable for the customer experience, I think those are really great ways to elevate customer experience.
One last question. The coolest customer experience story that you have in the last number of years in your career?
Oh, man. There are quite a few. I'm going to say this was unique, and it was cool because it was unique. When I was one of the early kind of adopters on Spotify, and I love Spotify, I still use it. I was astounded initially to the wrong side, but then to the plus side that they only served me on Twitter. So I just went on my Twitter account and talked to them, and it was very quick. very quick, very responsive. I just had a quick question. They gave me a quick answer. I thought that was very cool. I thought that was very brave. They didn't give me a number to call and sit on hold. They didn't put, an email string together. I did it right there on my phone on Twitter. I thought that was very cool. And I think, for me personally, because I'm stuck to my mobile phone, I find that some of the best experiences I have are through social media and through SMS. And so those organizations that have skipped past some of the more expensive and cumbersome means to get to me really quickly have earned a lot more of my business.
Rob, I think that's a fantastic summary of everything we're chatting about. Want to thank you for your time. And before we go, just if folks that are listening to this or watching this want to get in touch with you, how can they connect with you?
Well, I have a website, www.silversion.com, SCION. It's where, people who want to engage me on insights and strategies. I have a, practice that I do, where I do that for different businesses and startups and organizations. So that's where you can get a hold of me.
That's awesome. Thanks, Rob. Have a great day.
Thanks, Scott. You too.
As always, thanks for tuning in. If you're a fan of One-to-One, be sure to give us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Catch you next time.